Hello everybody, hope you are all doing well. Welcome. We are going to go ahead and get started. Pull up the story here. Alright, welcome. Welcome to the Raven's Roost, or Raven Reads, if you'd like to call it that. This is a series that I do every Monday night where I read you the stories that I've written. I am an author, I am a novelist, I love telling stories, it is my greatest passion. And today we are going to be continuing in our read of the story of Nomad. We are going to continue to read Nomad. We're going to try to get to chapter 14. There are a total of 18 chapters in Nomad. When we meet up next week and read the final chapter, if we have time, we'll read some other short stories that I've written lately to pad out the evening. But for now, we are going to continue reading Nomad. For those who need a refresher, Nomad is a story that I created with my buddy Jay. He and I created this character named Nomad, who is a shaman or spiritual prophet or leader who is empowered by a spirit known as the One. And he uses this power to travel the lands of Nye, which is his homeland, and protect it from evil individuals and evil spirits that would try to conquer it or destroy it. Right now, we left off with Nomad heading up to the town of Boltcha in the lands of the Brannook. The Brannook are not Nye natives, they are enemies of the Nye, and so Nomad has a particular dislike of the Brannook. And he is not only going to have to fight a spirit in Boltcha, he's going to have to deal with his own personal demons as he confronts the Brannook. And you'll see more of that as we go further into it. Really excited to read on today. It's going to be great. We're going to see a lot more of Nomad's weaknesses and struggles. But before we get into that, a couple rules that I need to lay out so that everyone knows them. In these reading streams, we do not talk video games, we do not talk history, we do not talk politics, we do not talk any of that stuff. Please do not bring me questions about games, about For Honor, about content that I'm making, about anything else. The only thing we talk here are stories and characters. Second rule, if you do want to talk with me or with other people in chat, you are free to, but please do not be distracting. Please do not spam messages, and please do not send all caps messages in order to get my attention. If you do, I will simply put you in timeout because trying to focus on the reading and the discussion of characters. So that is what we are going to do today. If we are all clear on that, excellent. I'm very excited to get into that today. Also, since my buddy Jay drew images for each of the chapters and enemies of Nomad, we will, every time I finish a chapter, I will show you guys the image that Jay drew for it. So I'm very, very excited to share with you the story of Nomad. All right, so we left off on Nomad Chapter 8, written September 18th, 2019. Let's jump into it. The city was nothing short of nightmarish. Nomad had seen many destroyed towns before as he made his travel to the lands of Nye, but this was something of a catastrophe. The ground was loose and nearly pulverized with debris and boulders lodged in housing and buildings, leaving wreckage around like a sandcastle on the beach under the weight of a rolling tide. Fires danced around the clutter, filling the air with smoke and fumes, thickening everything around them to the point of overheating. Nomad felt sweat on his brow as he walked among the destroyed city walls and felt some of the crushed bricks. More than once he came upon some relic or Brannook artifact that had been decimated. Seeing these things did not bother him morally, but it told him a great deal about the foe who had done these things. Though a Brannook himself, he had no love for his people, if he would so willingly cast aside their ways and culture. As he walked, he used his staff to push fallen rubble out of his way. Once or twice he came upon a dead body, a person buried under a building or someone with their entire torso pounded to the earth. What sort of weapon had caused this destruction? As he knelt beside a man whose body was still somewhat intact, he pushed a few rocks aside and noticed a man's ribcage had been crushed. With a grumble, he stood again and shook his head. "Takes a lot of rage to do this," he noted. "Steel your mind, Nomad." Nomad bowed his head at the One's voice, and he nodded. He knew. The One knew his mind and heart. Nomad felt almost nothing for these people. In fact, seeing the Brannook on the run in fear filled him with a twisted sense of gratification. "Forgive me," Nomad whispered. "I don't mean disrespect." "I know the anger in your heart. But steel yourself to it, Nomad. It is that same anger that has caused this calamity. Do not let yourself be consumed by it, or you will not long recognize yourself." Nomad nodded in silence and continued walking through the town, wondering if there was anyone still left here. The red of the fires left an unearthly tint to the horizon, and it was almost like Nomad was stepping into the throat of rage itself. "Filthy whore!" Nomad looked up in surprise at the sound of a voice. There was a roar of anger like a furious animal and the scream of a woman. Nomad began walking that direction when he saw her. A beautiful woman wearing what appeared to be a dancer's clothing was running away from something. Her silk sash and veil didn't hide her long, snow-white hair and cloudy blue eyes, brimming with tears. She was barefoot and running desperately towards Nomad.
"Stay away! No, please stay away from me!"
Nomad looked past her to see what the massive beast had been, and it was the largest he'd ever seen. A tall brute of a man came crashing towards them. He had bulging muscles and a face of wild fury. His eyes were blue and his long, full beard was white. He was most definitely a Brannock. His body pulsed with raw power and his teeth bared in wrathful disgust. In his hands was an enormous warhammer of wood and iron. He bellowed after the girl, and with a mighty swing, a nearby pillar came toppling down. His strength was massive. The girl cried and tried hard to outrun the hulking man, but he'd catch her in seconds with that hammer. And then, Nomad didn't wait for such an occurrence. He charged into the fray and pulled his staff. He wasn't stronger than this man, but he could stop him and buy the girl a moment. He clutched the staff in both hands and pulled back, ready to swing. "I call upon the One, King of Spirits. Master, fill me with your strength and allow me the will and might to protect your children." There was a rush of power that overtook Nomad as he jumped over the girl. His eyes glowed that beautiful white light, and his tattoos began to glow as well. With a focused and mighty swing, he brought the staff against the Brannock's head and sent him crashing back with tremendous force, knocking his hulking frame back into the wall of plaster and wood on the other side of the decimated street. Nomad landed on his feet and twirled his staff lightly behind him. The woman looked up at him in disbelief.
"Who are you?" she cried.
"A nomad," he answered. "What's your business with that man?" Nomad demanded.
"I'm just a dancer. I'm no one special. Please, I just want to get out of the city, but..."
The giant of the man came roaring out again as if nothing had happened and swung his hammer at Nomad. Nomad dodged the blow and threw the girl clear of the fight. He struck the man in the side of it with a solid kick, but the brute barely reacted as he swung again. Nomad took the strike, but threw his body back in time to move with the blow, allowing himself to nullify most of the impact. With a grunt, he rebounded off of a building, and the tall, hulking man was snorting and growling with rage.
"Who are ya? What the hell do you think you're doing with my property?"
he bellowed. Nomad glared at the woman and then motioned for her to leave. "Get out of here, and don't look back." The girl nodded and took off running.
"I'm talking to you, pipsqueak."
Nomad dodged the man's wild hammer swing and righted himself in a defensive posture. "I take it you're Hamal?" Nomad asked. "I've heard what you've been doing to this town, and now I see it for myself."
"And what do you know of me?"
Hamal demanded. He suddenly narrowed his eyes as if inspecting Nomad.
"You look familiar. Who are ya?"
"My name is Nomad, and what I know of you is very little," Nomad answered. "I know you were once a soldier in the war 11 years ago. I know that you were convicted of war crimes."
"Crimes?" he bellowed. "What crime? Trying to win? Bringing glory to your people and citizens? That's a crime?"
He roared at the skies. His tattoos began to shine blood red. One of his eyes, which Nomad noticed now had a scar running down it, also turned red. He gnashed his teeth and stomped his boot against the ground and raged.
"I was betrayed by my own, convicted of crimes done, but all of them, all for them, killed for my people, and they turned their backs on me. They're not my people anymore. They're nothing but the scum of the earth."
He lifted his massive hammer with one hand, and Nomad took a cautious step back.
"The Nye, the Brannock, none of that matters to me anymore. I'll slaughter who I like. I'll butcher who I wish. The world is for the mighty. Those too kind and merciful will be crushed under vengeance, fury, and wrath."
Nomad listened to his outraged Brannock speak, and it struck a slight chord with him. The words the one had spoken to him earlier began to replay in his head. "Rage will swallow you, and you won't be able to recognize yourself."
You're an eye, aren't ya? He snapped. Guess killing you ain't gonna mean nothing, but I'll do it anyway!
He swung the hammer down, and Nomad dove out of the way. He swung his staff around to hit Hamal across the jaw, sending him spinning. I hated you and your people, Hamal, Nomad snarled. My brothers fought in the war 11 years ago as well. Hamal was getting to his feet, and he tore after Nomad with a vengeance. Nomad swung his staff, striking Hamal in the fingers. He lost his grip, and the hammer tumbled out of his hand as Nomad kicked him back. And my oldest brother died in that war. He was killed on the hills of Farador. I know the pain your people caused us. At this, Hamal suddenly widened his gaze, and his lips curled.
Farador, he asked. Did you say Farador?
What of it? Nomad asked. Hamal sneered wickedly.
I knew you looked familiar. Yeah, I saw an eye soldier looked a lot like you at Farador.
Nomad faltered and his body went rigid.
What did you say?
You knew Iram?
Right, whatever his name was. I remember seeing a lad like yourself, crying like a babe when his body was broken to pieces.
Nomad felt every fiber of his being tighten. His own teeth were grinding against each other. Fire flashed in his eyes as the mental image of his brother being crushed to death showed itself. And standing over him, laughing over him, was this giant beast, this enemy, this monster. Even the voice of the one seemed distant. Don't you speak of him! Don't breathe a word about my brother!
I don't have to, Hamal laughed. Go to Farador yourself. I'll bet his squeals are still echoing in the hills.
Nomad roared and charged, striking with every ounce of his power. Hamal laughed at the strike and gave his own.
You ain't nearly angry enough yet, he laughed. You're pissed, but you're not blistering with anger like I was. That's when Kairuk showed himself to me, the spirit of wrath and rage.
Nomad started attacking again. He began swinging wildly at Hamal, angrier and angrier. He couldn't shake this rage. Hamal only laughed and then kicked Nomad in the chest, sending him sprawling backwards in agony. As his head hit the side of a house, Nomad clutched his bleeding forehead and moaned. You shut up about Iram, Nomad cried.
And what will you do if I don't?
Hamal asked. Nomad started to get up again, ready to stop this, to kill him. Nomad! The voice finally reached his heart, and Nomad dropped to a knee fast, feeling the anger of the one on his body. Calm yourself, child. Remember, I am with you. I am your refuge. Do not let the howling of angry animals drive you to madness. Nomad closed his eyes and bowed his head, seething with anger. Master, I can't get this rage off my heart. This demon, this beast, he speaks of my brother. He kindles that fire, and this is why you cannot defeat him, the one answered. You do not yet see with my eyes. You do not know what I know. Seek my patience and my peace, not my strength. It is not strength that overcomes overwhelming hate. It is patience, peace, and love. You lack these things. You will seek them. Nomad tried to steady his breathing, relaxing, letting the images fade from his mind. Master, I beg you, bring peace to my soul. Forgive me for my impatience and my rashness.
You're gonna sit there all day, or you're gonna fight!
Nomad barely had time to dodge as the hammer came crashing down right where he'd been kneeling. As he rolled aside, Hamal just glared at him expectantly.
You're gonna lay there and cower like your brother did, crying for your papa to save him.
Peace, Nomad. I will not let your words break me, Hamal. I will not lose myself as you have. Nomad hissed, slowly feeling the strain on his body loosening. He was feeling calmer. He felt at peace. Hamal charged again, and Nomad slowly let his staff fall to the ground as his tattoos began to glow ever brighter. The spirit you serve gave you strength and rage, but at the cost of your sanity and your peace of mind. I will not surrender my peace for worldly strength. By the one who I serve, I will not yield to hate. Hamal struck down with his hammer just as Nomad rose his own palm to open it. The palm of the Nomad met the hammer of Hamal. The collision was like the crashing of thunder in the heavens as the hammer began to shatter upon the iron. The wooden shaft splintered into pieces, and the iron cudgel fell to the ground in a dozen small, solid chunks. Hamal stared in disbelief as Nomad opened his eyes again. There was no sign of humanity in them, only matchless power of one who held the cosmos in his hands. Nomad, or rather his body, swung his other hand forward and struck Hamal in the chest. The resounding echo of force was intense. Hamal didn't even fly backwards, but the air behind him was repelled, blasting an incredible path of destruction and openness far behind him. It was as if the sheer force of the one had shot through Hamal and decimated all of creation behind him. Blood fell from Hamal's open mouth as his tattoos faded and he fell forward, hitting the ground with a loud thud. Anger, when tempered and controlled, can be a valuable tool. But when consumed by it, you become less of a man and more of a beast. Nomad whispered as he began to regain himself again. The tattoos on his body dimmed at last, and his eyes returned to normal. He stood there a long moment as tears began to fill his eyes. He stared at the body of Hamal and bit his lip in pain. Hamal's words had cut deep, and they'd brought out a darkness in Nomad he had not known. "I'm sorry, Master," Nomad whispered. "I still do not understand your will or your ways, and I nearly lost myself because of it." "I do not love you because you are faultless. I love you in spite of your faults, child. It is for this reason you must overcome your hate for the Brannock. Love as I have loved. You are a message of peace and hope for all people, not just for the ones that you favor." The one spoke. Nomad bowed down and placed a hand on the ground, closed his eyes, and wept to the one. "Thank you, Master," he whispered. In the midst of a broken city, the fires were finally dissipating, and the sun, thick anger that filled the town, was giving way to the light and cool of hope and peace at last. One moment, folks. Had to put my tablet on the charger, otherwise I can't read chat. Because my tablet is pretty close to dying, unfortunately. Alright, sorry about that. There we go. Alright, chapter 9. Boltcha was an oasis in the land of Nye. In a country that is mostly hot and dry, Boltcha is considered a miracle to the people of the Nye. Natural springs surround the town, and it was renowned for its inns, seasonal festivals, and it was a favorite vacation land for the king of Nye. It was well known that monarch meetings were held here constantly, but where people congregate, spirits are sure to come as well. Now Nomad found himself walking along the cobblestone path towards Boltcha. It was the will of the One that he make this journey, though in his heart he was secretly excited. As a boy, he heard of Boltcha and dreamed of going there someday. He was now getting to go, but he had to remind himself to keep his wits about him. If the One wished him here, surely it was to deal with a corrupt and wicked shaman. Or was it? Perhaps the One had other plans for him here. He hastened his pace, using his walking staff to pull him along further.
"Help! Help us!"
Nomad looked up the path to see a woman sprinting down the street, tears running down her face as she wailed for help. Nomad hurried to her and caught her as she threw herself, sobbing, into his arms. "What's wrong, ma'am? What's happened?" he asked. The woman looked up at him, and Nomad blushed, thinking that she was rather beautiful. Despite the tears and fear in her face, Nomad felt his heart flutter at the softness of her skin and the thickness of her lips. He privately imagined himself pressing his own lips to them, but shook his thoughts from his mind. Now was not the time for fantasizing. She brushed long, silky black hair from her face as she spoke.
It's Boltcha. It's falling apart.
How? What happened to it? Nomad asked. The woman shook her head, clutching it, trying to remember and collect herself. Nomad reached out and placed a hand on her head, calling upon the One. Be at peace. The woman gasped and her eyes widened as she stopped trembling.
You're a shaman, she gasped.
I am a servant of the One, he answered.
Then you must help. You must save Boltcha,
she pleaded, tugging on Nomad's arm. Nomad took her arm quickly and tried to remain calm, but feeling her pull on him only made him feel more bashful. Please, slow down. What happened in Boltcha? Knowing the details will help me. The woman slowly nodded in understanding and then tried to smile, clearly hiding her own nervousness.
Forgive me, sir. My name is Hagomi.
Hagomi, tell me, what became of Boltcha?
About a month ago, this man came to Boltcha. He was ugly and deformed, but he seemed friendly. We approached him to see if we could help, but the first place he went was the brothel.
The brothel? Why there?
He kept claiming he was in need of succor and rest. I was one of the girls who showed him the way, but he was ravenous. He wouldn't stop. Girls would come to him with food, drink, and with every ounce of passion and attitude, but he was never satisfied. Soon he went on a rampage and has been using unbelievable destruction.
Anything distinguishing about him? Nomad asked.
He seems to repulse people. Like any time we would get close, we felt an overwhelming urge to flee from him. It was more than his appearance. He is not the most vile we have serviced, but it was as if an aura kept us at bay.
Solum, Nomad growled.
Solum? The man said his name was Terrace.
No, Solum is the name of the spirit that he serves. Solum is the spirit of isolation and solitude. He repulses those around him and makes his hosts live a life alone and devoid of connection. But in exchange, he grants them power and strength, the ability to be self-reliant. Clearly, Terrace is sick of being alone and wanted some womanly company. But Solum won't let him have it, so he's going on a temper tantrum.
You are well informed of these spirits, sir.
Hagomi smiled, moving slightly closer.
Can you rid him from Boltcha?
I will, Nomad smiled back. I'll go at once. You should go somewhere safe. Hagomi nodded in reply and began to hurry back down the road. Nomad, meanwhile, began to march up the road, thinking about the fight ahead. But a few things didn't add up. Solum's host would have chosen Solum as their spirit because they liked solitude. They would dread the company of others or actively avoid it. What would make this Terrace person suddenly run to a brothel? Why a change in nature? Solum obviously wouldn't grant him the pleasure and company he sought. There was more to this. What was Solum up to? Boltcha was as beautiful as he had heard. Large buildings spaced out from each other, allowing for beautiful trees and brooks to run between them, making it feel as if you'd walked into a lost city in the forest more than an oasis in the desert. The smell of cooked foods and perfume was thick here, and as Nomad walked around, he expected to see some traces of Solum's influence. As the spirit of isolation, the streets would likely be clear so that Terrace could be alone. But that's not what Nomad saw at all. People were out and about, walking here and there. Young men flirting with lovely girls, children chasing fireflies and butterflies, while mothers glanced at handsome single men. It was a place of love and happiness if Nomad had ever seen it. But something felt wrong. How could Solum's influence not be felt here? The brothel wasn't hard to find. Plenty of men were seen moving around in and out of it. Nomad had never set foot in a brothel, but now would be his first time. With a hesitant first step, he walked inside the lovely building. Inside, a woman was waiting by the curtain to the back. She was scantily dressed, and she smiled as Nomad approached.
Good evening. How can we be of service? She asked.
I'm looking for the one called Terrace, Nomad explained. The woman's eyes flashed in recognition and nodded.
Sir, are you here to...
I will handle him. Just tell me where he is. She swiftly waved for Nomad to follow her, and she walked through the curtains. Nomad followed. The smells and sensations that filled Nomad were foreign and erotic. He tried his best to push these feelings out of his mind until the woman stopped at a far-off wooden door.
This is our special guest room. He's in here. He hasn't left in almost 2 days.
Evacuate the building. This could get very destructive. Nomad didn't wait for her reply as he pushed open the door and walked inside. He sat in the corner of the room, bandages loosely wrapped around his face and a hood over his head. His eyes were glowing yellow, and his tattoos were already glowing brightly. He was under Solemn's influence. He didn't seem to hear Nomad enter, and Nomad inhaled slowly, calling upon the One as his own eyes began to glow. Solem, you have outstayed your welcome here. Leave.
What does the One want with me?
Solem growled through Terrace.
Leave me be, shaman of the King of Spirits. I have done nothing wrong.
Nomad would normally have pointed out the wrongdoings of Solem, but he couldn't think of any. Solem was not a malicious spirit. He wasn't known for his destructive nature, and indeed nothing had been done wrong yet. From the look of things, Solem had caused no trouble to the town at all, and yet he needed to be purged. Hagome had been so frightened, and the brothel girl had been urgent and quick to lead him here. Solem needed to go. You should be alone now. You and your host are bound to isolation. By being here, you clearly are up to something, and I can't allow it, Nomad said.
So paranoid. It seems the One has chosen a fool for a servant.
The shaman rose from his seat.
But I have no interest in leaving either.
He moved with unbelievable speed, a spear suddenly appearing from behind his cloak. He thrust out one of his bandaged arms to restrain Nomad. Nomad threw up his arm and caught the bandage and swung his staff out, blocking the spear and landing a kick in Terrace's chest. The shaman grunted and fell backward. Nomad called upon the One to add strength to his strike. He felt the familiar flow of power rush through his body, and yet the power felt lacking. What's happening? Nomad wondered. Why are you holding back, Master? Nomad hit Terrace and he retaliated with a spirit-fueled kick. Nomad swung up his arm to defend himself and stop the kick. He sent a leg sweep down, kicking Terrace off his feet. He then grabbed the ankle of his foe and swung him against the wall. Again, he called on the One. But nothing changed. It was as if the One was not aiding him in this fight at all. What was happening? Why did he feel so alone? So useless? Unless... This is your doing, isn't it? Nomad asked. You're corrupting me, making me isolated from the One. It won't work, Nomad cried.
Such a fool, Solem growled. I cannot sever the ties of a spirit with their host. If you do not feel the presence of your chosen master, then perhaps it is because your master is not with you right now. Maybe it wasn't the One's wish to chase me off. Nomad grit his teeth in anger. Don't lie to me, Solem. I was called here by the One. I am his servant alone. I came here to remove you from this town, and here you are. But there was no denying that he needed power to do that, and the One seemed distant. He had to remember his reason for being here, his purpose. Terrace didn't wait and charged again, spear in hand. Fall, servant of the One, he cried. Nomad dove out of the way and tried once again, calling upon the power. Power! I need power! Finally, he felt something. Something was flowing through his arm. The image of Hagome filled his mind. Her smiling expression. Her loving embrace in his arms. That sensation. She had cried for his help, and he would help her. She had begged him to rid this town of Solem, and he would. No matter what, he'd do it. He'd rid the town of the spirit. He'd save Hagome's city. With a mighty strike of his palm, a flash of power rose through him, and Terrace was blasted backwards, smashing into and out of the wall of the brothel, falling to the ground in a heap. As his tattoos ceased glowing, Nomad calmed down as well. The power he felt was not from the One, and yet it had conquered the spirit. What had he felt? He looked at Solem and waited, but he felt no change in the atmosphere. When a spirit was defeated and banished, there was always a change. The change in the people or surroundings, but he felt nothing. There was no change. What is this? Nomad asked. Master, what is going on? This fight was too easy, and why did you not help me in this fight? If you do not feel the presence of your chosen master, then perhaps it is because your master is not with you right now.
Maybe it wasn't the one's wish to chase me off. The words of Solem echoed in Nomad's head. It wasn't the one's wish. But the one had led him to Boltcha, right? But if it wasn't to slay Terrace, and it wasn't to banish Solem, who had led him to do that? Only one person had asked him to defeat this spirit. One person had come to his mind when he dealt the final blow. One. Only one person. You. Nomad turned around to see a woman standing behind him, leaning against the doorframe with a seductive and arrogant grin. You're the one.
Well fought, darling.
Higumi smiled as her own body began showing signs of tattoos, glowing emerald green.
I'm so very impressed.
Only one spirit can manipulate like this. Sever a shaman from their spirit, Nomad hissed, fear gripping his voice as he finally knew the truth. It all made sense now. It was all clear to him, but far too late. Higumi, you're a shaman too, and your spirit is Salax.
Allow me to better introduce myself.
Higumi bowed low with mock reverence.
I am the shaman of Salax, the spirit of lust and desire, and you will make a fine servant, Nomad.
All right. So I forgot to do this earlier, but I didn't show you all the images that Jay drew, and he would be very upset with me if I did not show you the images. So let me go ahead and share those images with you now, while we have time. Give me a second. So first off, let me show you the image from the previous chapter we did, where he fought Hamal. Jay did a very good image of Hamal, and I'd like to show it to you. It's a very large image, so you'll need to give me a minute. And no, she's not necessarily Delilah. Nomad was not meant to be a one-to-one of Samson. He was actually meant to be more of a one-to-one to Elijah. But this is Hamal, the shaman who serves wrath and destruction and fury. I'll give that a minute to stay up there so y'all can see it. All right. And now I will take it down and I will show you the image of Terrace. I think you will like Terrace's design. It was very well done. So that is Terrace. He was the shaman that Nomad literally just fought, who he thought he was sent by the One to fight, but instead was sent by Higumi. All right, now I'll take that one down. And last but not least, I will show you an image of Higumi, the shaman of Salax. And that is her. In fact, since she's going to be such an important character, I'll leave her up over me for the duration of this portion of the reading. All right. I'll leave her up there for now. right. Chapter 10. Salax was the one spirit that Nomad feared above any other. During his travels, he'd heard much about this spirit. Her nature was lust and desire. She feeds on these human weaknesses and draws on them. He had come across Hagome along the way to town and had been so blinded by the beauty of her face and features that he didn't even detect Salax's presence. Now he stood kicking himself in frustration. That was why the one hadn't aided him in fight with Solum. He had come here under her instructions, acted on her wishes. He wasn't here to fight Solum. He was here for her. But could he? As Salix smiled and walked towards Nomad, she held out her hand, which was now clutching a long, steel-linked chain. The end of the chain had a long, sharp barb on it. Her eyes began to glow a brilliant emerald green, and her tattoos, now exposed with her dress slightly torn aside, began to grow the same color. Despite her now more intimidating aura and presence, Nomad still felt his heart beating fast looking at her.
Tell me, handsome, do you believe in fate? Or love at first sight?
Nomad's heart fluttered, and he bit his lip to keep himself from blurting out something nonsensical. Sensing his passion, Hagome giggled.
So innocent.
Silence! Nomad sneered. You deceiver!
Deceiver? Hagome asked. How rude of you. Nothing about me is fake. Feel free to come and inspect me yourself.
She took a strutting step forward, causing Nomad to retreat back a step and grab his staff to defend himself. He was sweating. Why was he so nervous? She hadn't even made a move to attack, and yet he felt himself losing the fight already. Her invitation to inspect her body for flaws was tantalizing. I won't give in to the likes of you.
All men do, Nomad, she laughed. It's the nature of man to lust and desire. All other spirits stem from these things. Greed comes from a desire for material possessions. Gluttony comes from a lust for more resources. Wrath is the desire to implement your will in rage upon others. Desire. It is the ultimate state of mortality. To want. And I am the embodiment of what you want. But how peculiar that I should meet you, Nomad, for now I'm convinced that fate is real.
Why is that, pray tell? Nomad asked.
Solum bored me, Hagome shrugged. The spirit of isolation served his purpose for a time, but a woman has needs. I need more power, more to feed on, and I need to prove a point. That there's no human or spirit who cannot bend to my power, and who should come strolling towards town but you, servant of the One. Should I break you, it will cement myself as the ultimate shaman, and Salax as the greatest of spirits.
Nomad didn't even wait to regain his composure before throwing himself towards her, staff drawn back to deliver the blow. Hagome spun out of the way, and Nomad swung the staff in an arch to strike her head. Slashing back with her chain, Hagome danced past Nomad, cackling.
Sloppy! I expected better from the Nomad.
Don't you dare patronize me, Nomad sneered.
If you'd rather, there are better things I could do for you,
Hagome whispered, gently stroking along Nomad's shoulders from behind. Startled by her sudden appearance behind him, Nomad swung back, calling upon the strength of the One. But like before, he felt nothing, and she easily knocked his strike aside. She then swung out her chain as if snared Nomad's throat. The chain wrapped around his neck, and she tightened it. Nomad let out a grunt of pain and felt himself falling to his knee as he was struggling to breathe.
You've lost, Nomad. You don't need to die for it,
Hagome explained sympathetically as she started to draw her chain closer. Nomad struggled and winced at the agony he was feeling, and he couldn't deny the arousal he felt as well. With each look at her, Hagome only seemed more alluring, more desirable. Where was the One? Why did he not save him?
Master, why are you silent?
You haven't discovered the reason yet, Nomad? Hagome asked. It's because you're not his servant anymore. You're mine. The moment you agreed to do my will, the moment you accepted my proposal to destroy another spirit on my behalf, you forfeited your ties to your master and made Salax your new master. That is why no shaman can defeat me, because when they succumb to my will, they are Salax's servants forever.
I will never succumb!
You already have, Hagome whispered. Now be silent, boy, and let me give you your reward.
Nomad looked up to see her starting to glow with a green light that was not there before. She was going to do something to him. He'd heard horror stories of what Salax was capable of. He wouldn't allow it. No, this wasn't how he would fail. Master! Nomad cried. I beg you! Forgive me! Save me! With one last desperate move, he grabbed the chain and yanked it hard, pulling Hagome towards him with incredible strength. Hagome let out a cry of shock as Nomad lunged and struck her hard in the stomach. With a grunt of surprise, Hagome was repelled by the strike, and the chain released its hold on his throat. Nomad freed himself and retreated far from Hagome's reach. Hagome rubbed her stomach, looking quite put off, sneering.
You're not so easily broken, she pointed out. That just makes this more entertaining for me.
Nomad was trembling from his head to his toes. Hagome was dangerous. Even now, he felt pity for her. He regretted having struck her. He wanted to hold her, touch her. His mind and heart were in conflict. He grit his teeth and tried to resist these feelings. For a brief moment, he felt the one save him, but now he was falling away again. He was snapped from his confusion and terror by the sound of a whiplash. The chain was extending fast. Nomad threw up his staff and struck the chain aside before pirouetting and performing a high kick to Hagome. She swerved underneath the blow and swung her chain along the ground to catch Nomad's leg, but Nomad had jumped back out of her reach. Nomad slowly began to realize the true danger of her fighting style. By using the chain in a swinging arc, she could keep Nomad at a distance. The closer that he tried to get, the more prone to being caught he would be. It was true, the nature of lust and desire. The way she functioned.
Well played. Now let's take this dance a little further. It's not fun if all you do is avoid me.
The rotation of the chain increased. With the spinning of her body, she could create large, sweeping swipes at Nomad, who was forced to duck and knock the chain aside with his staff. As the chain grew close to his skin, he felt a warmth overwhelm him. It filled his body, increasing his blood flow. More than once, he caught himself staring dumbfounded at Hagome's body, lost in her sexy and alluring swings and movements. It was all he could do to evade. A few times he made focused and concentrated strikes at her. None made contact, and she merely laughed at his attempts. She was clearly playing with him at this point. Was it all superior training? Or was that he couldn't bring himself to hurt her? A truth began to dawn on Nomad with each moment of the battle. I can't win this, Nomad hissed. My heart is not ready.
So you understand at last, Hagome asked. Join me, Nomad. Let's enjoy the blessings of Salax and her nature.
I can't do that, Nomad remarked.
Mighty greedy, aren't we? You don't wish to continue our dance, but you also won't leave me be? Some boys can be so needy. But don't worry, sweetheart. Give me a chance, and all those doubts will melt away.
I have no doubt you have the power to relieve me, Nomad answered. If I am to speak the truth, you are very tempting, Hagome.
I can't take all the credit, Nomad. But when I first met you, I could sense your tension. Your insecurity, Hagome said sympathetically. You are drawn from place to place with little rest in it. You have not experienced the pleasures of the flesh. You have not been shown the compassion of a woman. You are deprived of a gift that humanity was blessed with from the beginning. Of course you're drawn to Salax, because she can fill that void you have.
You might be right, Nomad growled. Perhaps you could fill that void. But she would only leave more of a void in my soul. No, I will not submit to her or to you. Hagome looked disappointed by this, but her expression slowly shifted back to one of loathing and even arrogance.
Then what will you do, Nomad? Your connection to the One has been severed, apparently, but has certainly been damaged. Can you defeat Salax without it?
I can't, Nomad answered.
Then I confess my confusion, she laughed. You know you can't win, but you won't surrender?
I'd sooner die than give in to you. But I'm also not foolish enough to continue this fight. Nomad spun and lunged for the window nearest to him. With a fierce kick, he shattered the glass and leapt out of it. Higomi, stunned by this act of desperation, ran to the window to see Nomad land in the grass outside the brothel, running for the safety of the tree line.
The coward, Higomi whispered. But what a looker, too. I do hope he returns. He will, Salix replied, with a hissing and seductive giggle. He has had a taste of me, and will hunger for more. Be patient, my dear. He will come back.
Hidden away in the wilderness outside of town, Nomad knelt by a creek running out of the city, staring at his reflection in the water. He reached down and splashed his face with it, struggling to get Higomi out of his mind.
Damn that woman, and damn my eyes!
Nomad cried, tears of frustration welling. As he gazed into the water, he swore he saw the rippling waters distort his image, distort his face. He saw in them a vision of himself, but with eyes glowing green, the color of Salax.
No!
Nomad covered his eyes and wept. Help me, master. Please, I'm falling to the spirit, and I cannot face her alone. Save me from her, please. Save me from myself. As he cried, a strange sensation began to take him. It was as if a wind were blowing and embracing him, erasing the vision of Higomi from his mind. His heart felt clear, and his mind more open. The one. It was the one. Master, Nomad cried. As he prayed to his master, Nomad felt the truth fill his heart, the way to overcome himself and his fears. The battle was not yet over. But he could not enter it again without preparation. Guide me, master. I will not fail you again. Chapter 11. 3 weeks had passed since Nomad had fled from the sight of Salax and Higomi, and Higomi was becoming impatient, desiring his return. Outside her palace, made from a brothel, she heard the cries of anguish, pain, lust, and perversion as an orgy was in full swing beyond the walls. The ravenous hunger for pleasure resonated from her depraved spirit, driving the people of the town mad with their deepest, most lustful desires. It was a clear indication of the spirit's anger. She wanted the one's chosen vessel. What a victory would it be to lay claim to that handsome man. Higomi wanted him as well. She wanted to seal his contract to Salax personally. It wasn't often she came across one like him, physically gorgeous but also mentally capable. Most men who beheld her were weakened by a mere eye flutter, but this one had actually withstood her. That hadn't happened in so long she'd forgotten the feel of it, and the memory was very painful. The orgy was a stew of blood, fluids, and bodies. There was no sanity to be found, and none even noticed the man walked through the town gates, a staff in hand and a hood over his head. He'd been here before, but now returned slowly and carefully to avoid the pools of blood and sin that seemed to mar the ground which he strode. He was in no hurry, but his direction was keenly set on the brothel. As he walked, Higomi suddenly perked up, realizing a familiar sensation had arrived. She began to rise from her bed to reach him.
Stay where you are, servant,
the spirit of Salax hissed cunningly.
The game is more fun when he must play the pursuer. If he intends to fight us once more, let him approach, and he will walk into our arms. To go to him would provide him power he does not deserve.
Higomi pouted, but returned to her bed, draping herself back expectantly and undoing her nightgown to expose her skin and her body to her visitor. As she waited with impatience, she began devising all the ways she'd win his body. Let Salax keep his soul and spirit. She wanted his flesh with her flesh. He'd fall at her feet, just like all the rest. He entered, shoving the door open with his palm, and as Nomad entered the bedchamber, his hood masked his eyes, his chin visible and his scowling mouth gritted in determination. Forgive the intrusion, he spoke simply but directly, but I've returned to finish what we started 3 weeks ago.
Nomad, I knew you'd return to me in time. Do you thirst for my body again?
My thirst is quenched.
for I have drunk from the spring of life. Nomad raised his staff in a defensive stance while Hagomi just rolled her eyes.
Ugh, please spare me the jargon. It takes me out of the mood.
Nomad didn't reply, staring directly towards her behind his cowl. She didn't wait. She couldn't wait. She rushed him, her body keen to take his. First, she'd strike his chest to wind him. Then she'd sweep his leg and bring him to the ground. She swung her arm forward, but Nomad suddenly pivoted and knocked her arm aside, sending her past him. She staggered, but used the momentum to run towards the wall. She leapt off of it and then did a swinging kick at his face. Nomad leaned back hard, letting the kick sail past his head. As he returned to his fighting position, she didn't let up as Hagomi swung another kick at his head. This time, Nomad brought his staff up, blocking her kick at the ankle, and then kicking her ground foot, sending her to the floor. She let out a yelp of pain, and Hagomi had to roll back to her feet.
Ooh, lucky boy. You're different from last time. I like it when you struggle.
But he wasn't struggling, and she knew it. In fact, he didn't seem affected by her energy at all. Any man or woman exposed to the power of Salax and her influence were overcome by lust and desire. Through this power, Hagomi had wooed men, women, animals, and even spirits into her arms and bed. Even those who resisted her stumbled, drooled, and made fools of themselves at her behest. She had no fear of any creature as long as Salax aided her. But this one was clearly not jaded or undone. What was his secret? She rose up once more, tapping once more into her powers of lust. She strode towards him, swinging her hips and ensuring her naked body was exposed.
Why must we go through this? Don't you want to skip past all this silliness and violence when everything you could ever dream of is right here?
Nomad didn't budge.
You felt it last time, Nomad, didn't you? The pleasures of Salax's gifts. You could feel wanted at last, feel desired, feel pleasure the rest of your days. There's so much to gain, Nomad.
All this gain I count as loss, Nomad answered. You gain pleasure and desire, but lose your self-control and sight of what true beauty is. You're right. I do desire love and affection. But my life belongs to my master, and no other.
You say that, but one look at me and my body, and your heart will be...
This time Nomad moved first, his palm outstretched and striking Hagomi in the shoulder. She staggered back as Nomad followed up the blow with a spinning back strike with his staff, crashing against her nose. Just as the staff returned to its resting stance, he launched a back kick into her core. Hagomi was flung to the other side of the room. With a cry of rage, she jumped up again and lashed out at him with clawing fury. Nomad dodged and ducked away from her, his body poised and focused. It was as if he swung free of her tackling strike that she saw something horrifying. Nomad's hood fell off to expose his face, and she saw a long cloth wrapped around his eyes.
You blinded yourself? You're wearing a blindfold?
She shouted in fury. The eyes are deceptive, and I need them not. The one is my eyes and my strength, Nomad answered. Hagomi was fuming with rage. Her body shook dangerously, and the power of her spirit flowed off her. However, Nomad was unwavering.
Then I will rip that bandage off of your eyes and force you to behold me.
She made a swipe at his face to clutch the blindfold, but the instant she came close, Nomad struck down her hand with his own palm and then fired a rear back kick into her stomach, knocking her a clear 10 yards away and smashing her into the wall of the bedroom. With her hair tousled and her face contorted in rage, the visual of sexual beauty that once befit Hagomi was slowly ripping away to show a quite horrifying anger. Nomad stayed stoic, and as Hagomi stood again, she quickly clutched a great long whip chain, the same weapon she'd been blessed with by Salax.
Filthy man. Disgusting and filthy, stupid man, she snarled. You think you can outwit me? You think you can resist me? I am sex incarnate. I'm lust made manifest. You're my slave. All mortals will be slaves to me.
She lashed out with the whip, and Nomad attempted to dodge it, but couldn't leap away from the coiling chain. The chain wrapped around his waist and yanked him forward. As it did, he used the momentum of his pull to let him rebound off the floor and land a front kick at Hagomi. She dodged, using this opportunity to wrap her chain further around Nomad until he was completely tied up by it. He swung at her, but he was now immobilized.
I guess fighting blindfolded wasn't a smart move after all, sweetie.
Higomi inhaled slowly, recomposing herself and showing that familiar sultry attitude and tone.
Now, I think it's time for the game to end, don't you? Now, let's take off that silly blindfold.
Before Nomad could stop her, she grabbed hold of the bandage and yanked it free, showing Nomad's eyes. He looked upon her, and there she stood, naked and exposed, lusty and excited.
Take me in, Nomad. Tell me what you see.
Nomad stood stock still, glaring at her through his now fully exposed eyes. Higomi strutted left and right to ensure all of her was exposed. Nomad's mouth then curled into a sneer.
"You are unsightly," he growled.
Whatever response she'd expected, Higomi had not expected that. Her eyes widened and she stopped strutting.
What did you just say to me?
"I see you for what you are. I see your true self," he snapped. "The one has given me the eyes to see you, and what a creature you are."
Nomad could no longer see the lovely, alluring woman Higomi, but a hunchbacked, gangly figure of a woman with a crooked nose and 2 teeth growing over her bottom lip. She had a wart above her left eye that made it hang slightly over the eye itself, creating a strange expression on her face. Her hair, long and wiry, stuck out in odd positions, and her body lacked the feminine frame that could be expected of any average woman. Higomi sensed that Nomad could see her former self, became horrified, backing away from him fast, covering herself without thinking, as if just the use of her arms could mask what he was seeing beneath her beauty. Salax granted you your sexual beauty, gave you the love life you always wanted, but in return for this, you're nothing but a common slut. A whore who must gratify herself on man, woman, child, and animal alike. You have no self-control, and you lack any shame or modesty. You feel nothing when you take the virginity of another. You have no qualms about the sins you commit against others in the name of your sick and twisted lust. Nomad hissed and turned his face away. What a wretched creature you are. I have nothing but pity for you.
"Shut your condescending mouth!"
Higomi screamed, rushing at Nomad with arms outstretched to strike him. Nomad dodged aside and shoved his open palm against her chest, sending her sprawling backward. She'd run so hard and fast at him that she'd not had time to react or dodge the blow, and was sent rolling backwards. Nomad then tossed his staff aside and raised his hands. "I will remove this taint from you, and may you one day find peace."
Don't! She screamed. Don't take my beauty!
Nomad faltered a moment.
You couldn't understand what it's like, Nomad. To be unwanted and ugly wherever you walk. To have a body and a face that revolts the eye and the senses. Salax gave me beauty. She gave me hope.
You mistake. Your mistake was believing that beauty would provide you lasting hope, Nomad explained. The one does not see your face, but your spirit. And yours is far more horrific than you can imagine. For the sake of your own selfish desire and vanity, you took advantage of innocent people and turned a resort village into a giant land of depravity.
You talk big, Higomi challenged, but you're just as depraved as I am. You were going to fall into my clutches the first time we met. Admit your weakness. You and I are no different.
Nomad took a few steps towards her, causing Higomi to scramble back. I admit, I am weak, Higomi, he answered, but I do not mask my weakness with faulty veils. I overcome it. Higomi screamed and charged once more, calling upon all her latent power from Salax. But for some reason she felt like it wasn't as prominent, like her spirit had ebbed away. And with a final thrust from Nomad's palm into her face, he spoke. By the power of the One, my master, I expel Salax from you. Be gone! The resulting eruption of power was immense, and from outside the brothel, the entire town felt a weight lift off of them as shame and control were reestablished. Men, women, and children suddenly became aware of themselves, horrified by the distasteful things they had been doing. What had become of them these last few weeks? Why had they dared partake in such outlandish actions? Meanwhile, as they all tried to disappear back into their daily lives, a single vagabond exited the near-destroyed brothel. As he walked out of town, the quiet sobs of a young hag could be heard from the upstairs suite, deprived of the lustful power that granted her a false sense of beauty. All right, we'll go ahead and take Hagomi's image down. And we'll move on to the next one. Chapter 12. This is an interesting chapter. I think you'll find this very interesting, but I need to put up another image, so give me just a second. But yeah, Hagomi was probably his most difficult opponent yet. Give it a second. It's taking a minute to load. All right, this is the new image. And I will let the story do the speaking. Chapter 12. Her hands were shaking. She was afraid of what she could do next. Clutched in her fist was a long dagger she'd hidden from her family. It was all she had now, and all she could use. She wore only the robes on her body, her long white hair hanging down past her shoulders, and her blue eyes holding back tears as she kept looking at the knife, imagining with trepidation what she would use it for. She could picture it pushing into flesh as red blood spilled from the wound. She could see his face. That horrible monster's face, twisted in agony, and then his yellow, disgusting eyes glazing over, and the thought made her feel sick to her stomach. She couldn't feel this way. She was Brannock. The Brannock were a proud warrior people with a long history of strength in war and combat. She'd sparred with her father and brothers before, and she'd always done well. She knew she could handle herself in a skirmish, but she'd never killed anyone. Until now. Today she'd set out to finally kill someone. To finally take a life. She would kill Torin, the Prince of Thieves. 2 years ago, she and her family had moved south from the lands of the Brannock to the land of Nye to live away from all the infighting and turmoil in their homeland, and were now living quietly and peacefully in the forests of Nye. But only a few months ago, a band of thieves had made it their habit of ransacking the village nearest them and paying her family home visits too. When they came, they were always needlessly violent, knocking over whatever they liked, trashing her home and grabbing whatever they wanted. And leading them was a man with deep yellow eyes and red tattoos up and down his arms and chest. He wore a cowl over his face, but she remembered him removing it once to show a smile of golden teeth. His name was Torin, and he called himself the Prince of Thieves. For the first few weeks of his visits, she and her family had tried to be patient and let him take what he wanted. Gold and valuables were a small price to pay for peace and serenity. But Torin didn't just settle for jewelry and gold. He took heirlooms, treasures, clothing. He took crafts, tools, and whatever else he wanted. Her family was struggling to live, and
Because he took their money, they couldn't afford to buy new ones. In his last visit, her brother Caleb decided to stand up to Torin and fight him, using their family sword. The moment Torin arrived, Caleb attacked, but no sooner had Caleb raised the sword than Torin's tattoos suddenly glowed a dark crimson, and Caleb was thrown backwards like a doll. Torin then allowed his followers to beat Caleb into a bloody pulp before her eyes. Her mother and father had spent the last day burying her brother, as Torin had helped himself to the family sword Caleb had come at him with. She was furious. She wanted payback. She wanted the sword back. She wanted everything back. She'd take it back. If Torin thought he could take what he liked with violence, then she'd take it back with violence. She would sneak into his camp, find where he slept, and then stab him through his ugly face. But then she felt squeamish again. The thought of killing him halted her. "Curses," she whimpered. "What's wrong with me? Why can't I?
A bit late for an evening stroll, isn't it? She spun around in surprise to see a man standing behind her. He had on a cloak and a staff in his hand. He had a clean face with long brown hair, and his eyes were an indistinct gray. He took her in, and his eyes narrowed slightly. "You're a Brannock."
Who are you?" she asked. "How did you—"
"Your white hair and blue eyes are a dead giveaway. But so is your accent," he shrugged. "Why are you a Nye? And what are you doing out so late?" She didn't want to answer him, but there was something about the man's voice, about the way he stood and spoke, that sent warm waves through her body. She felt this was a man she could trust. She had no reason to trust him, but she felt calm around him.
My name is Lisha, and my family traveled here from our homeland to live in peace, but we've been oppressed by bandits here for weeks now, and we can't take it anymore. My brother is dead, and Torin must die."
She held up the knife, a silent indicator of her intentions. The man stared at the knife, and then at her. "Do you know how to use that?" he asked.
"Of course I do. I am a warrior. I am Brannock."
"A warrior is not a killer. Those are two different things," the man replied forcefully. "To be a warrior means to battle with honor, distinction, and discipline. A warrior may take a life, but they do not do it with half-hearted resolve or with uncertainty. They do it out of necessity and with valor. A killer simply extinguishes life. You are a warrior, but you're not a killer." The man walked forward and held out his hand. "Don't sink to that level." The girl immediately retracted her hand and held up the dagger defensively, common sense reasserting itself and pride bringing blood rushing to her face. Blushing fiercely at the man's words.
"How dare you talk down to me?" Lisha shouted. "I'm not a child, and I'm not afraid."
The man sighed and set aside his staff again on a nearby rock and opened his arms. "Then show me. Kill me now, little Brannock. I'm defenseless and unarmed. Kill me. Show me this lack of fear you have." Lisha stood horrified at the prospect. She could feel the weight of the dagger. She could visualize herself charging him and plunging the knife deep into his chest. And then the sick feeling washed over her again. Her hand started to shake. He was defenseless. He had not harmed her. And she was imagining, I can't. I can't. You are not a killer, Lisha. The man walked to her and gently gripped the dagger's blade in his hand. She squeaked and started to pull the dagger away, but he held firm. A trickle of blood ran from his palm as she accidentally cut him, but he showed no sign of pain. You are in pain, child. You are in mourning. You have a warrior's heart, but you do not have the discipline or the conviction to kill Torin. If you continue on this path, you will enter his camp like him, like a thief in the night. You will find where he sleeps and you will steal his life as he has stolen from you. In doing this, you become like him. You sink to his distasteful level. Lisha, you are not like him. You are a warrior, not a killer, not a thief. Let it go, little one." After a few moments of painful sobs and biting her lip in agony, she finally let go of the dagger as the man took it from her. He smiled sympathetically and tossed it aside as Lisha sank to her knees, crying.
"Why am I so weak? Why?" she whimpered. "He killed my brother, and he stole everything from me. He is a monster. He deserves to die. He deserves it."
"That's interesting, coming from a Brannock," the man muttered coldly. Lisha looked up at him in surprise as he now was glaring past her towards the path beyond, as if glaring into something else entirely. "My brothers were also killed, but at the hands of Brannock like you. And not just my brothers, but many people of Nye were killed thanks to the invasion of your people. Do your people not deserve death as well for the blood they spilt? Don't you think it's a perversion that you would live in the land that your kin caused us suffer? Would you—" Before he could finish, he froze, his eyes wide as if a noise had startled him. He then closed his eyes and calmed down, breathing slowly. "Forgive me. I spoke wrongly," he whispered.
I didn't know. I'm sorry,"
Lisha admitted. "You're not their killer," he sighed, looking away from her in shame. "But this vicious cycle of hate, revenge, and justice only brings more death. We are not meant to be the dealers of justice and retribution. When we take justice into our own hands, we become hypocrites, for we ourselves are just as guilty."
I don't understand,"
Lisha admitted. "No, I suppose you don't." "So few do." He then began to walk past her. "Go home, Lisha. Return to your family and mourn for your brother. Leave Torin to me." He turned to walk away down the pathway he'd been staring down. Lisha raised her hand to stop him, but then retracted it, fearful.
Wait! Torin isn't normal,"
Lisha explained.
"He has some weird tricks. I've never seen anything like it."
"I'm not normal either," the man replied with a glance before continuing. "Do not worry about me." Lisha watched in awe as the man walked on. She lowered her hands and stared defeated. She bit her lip and brushed strands of hair out of her face. As she tried to think of what to do next, a part of her wanted to do as he said, to just go back home. There was nothing here for her now. He'd taken her dagger, and without it she had no weapon to kill Torin. But what would she have killed him anyway? Was the stranger right that she wasn't a killer? That warriors and killers weren't the same thing? In her homeland, warriors would boast around bonfires about their kills and their victories. They would relish the tales of battle and the glories of bloodshed. These stories would always fill the children, including Lisha, with glee. There was such excitement in every detail, joy and investment for each happening and death, but each story always involved killing. There was always dying to be had in these tales. She never stopped to consider that before. In every great war story she'd heard, someone always died. No one ever seemed bothered by it, not even the one telling the tale. But now it bothered her. Had she all this time been relishing in the glory of murder? No, that couldn't be true. And yet, the stranger lost his brothers to war. War with her people. Had his brothers died in one of those stories? Had she praised their deaths without meaning to? How many lives had been taken in glorious war? Was it all for nothing? Would it solve anything? Would killing Torin solve anything? Would she be able to speak of it as a glorious tale later? What is the difference between a warrior and a killer? She needed to talk to him again, even if just for a moment. She quickly darted down the path after him. She would catch up to the stranger and find him again. She needed to listen to him again, ask him more questions. Something drew her to this man, something she never felt before. There was something about him, a presence she felt that was calling to her, a wisdom. His wisdom was sound and yet not worldly. In fact, he reminded her a lot of Torin. Who is this nomad? She whispered to herself as she slunk silently through the woods to find the man she'd only just met. With any luck, he'd disclose more to her and answer these questions nagging at her heart. And maybe she'd see how he dealt with Torin. He was no killer either. He was a warrior.
So how does a warrior take a life? And how is it different than a killer? I have to see this. I have to know. Maybe this man knows who I am.
All right, chapter 13. Elisha's heart was beating faster than it had ever done before. Wait, I'm sorry, reading the wrong one. I skipped ahead one. My apologies. Here we are, sorry. Elisha was careful as she trailed the stranger. She had lived in this area long enough to know how to step over the louder branches and to avoid the dips in the path that would catch her feet. Avoiding the trail wasn't an issue for her, as she watched the stranger walking along the forest trail, and she saw him drawing closer and closer to the thieves' camp. She became more worried for him. He had no weapon to help him, and even if he did, he seemed to frown on the act of murder. So how would he deal with the thieves? What would he do when confronting Torin? Torin still had such bizarre powers. There was that strange glint in his eyes that he would have, the one he had when he killed her brother. Would that stranger die too? If he did, what then? She didn't have much time to ponder on this, as finally the thieves were coming out of their hiding, hearing the stranger approaching. A few drew swords and knives, but none moved to attack, letting him get closer and closer to the camp. A few even began to follow him, not attempting subtlety or discretion, as if letting him know he was trapped by them. Nowhere to escape and nowhere to run. As he finally entered the large encampment, Elisha knelt down behind a tree to watch and see what he would do.
"You lost, friend?" one of the bandits asked.
No, I'm right where I need to be, the stranger answered. My name is Nomad, and I'm here to see your boss. There was a chorus of chuckles and sneers from the bandits.
"This one's funny. I bet Torin will love this one."
Elisha bit her lip in fear, half expecting them to jump him, but the man only stared back, stiff and firm. Bring him to me, please.
"Ah, nice manners," one of the men laughed, walking out to him with an arm outstretched. "Maybe I'll go get him, if you hand over the money you got."
Fool, the stranger sighed. Your only deity is the metal that jingles in your pocket. Your eyes are as blind to all but gold.
"I won't ask again so nicely."
He pulled a knife and stormed towards the stranger.
"I said, give me your gold."
Your eyes did not see your fellow man, nor do they see the misery you cause. They only see the gold lining their pockets.
And now your eyes shall see nothing at all.
Nomad reached out and grabbed the man's head and then shoved him back with enough force to send him crashing into a tree. The bandits leapt back in horror as the injured man staggered to his feet, and then gasped, screaming.
"I can't see! I can't see anything! What the hell do you mean, Bart? I'm blind! I can't see nothing! Someone help me! Turn on the damn lights!"
Your eyes reflect your soul, blinded and dark.
"Open your heart, and so too will your eyes be opened,"
Nomad answered. Elisha stared open-mouthed, her hands trembling. That man was a shaman. Time out. Firstly, and secondly, there. I told y'all we're not doing that. This is about the story reading, and all this talk about corner stores, games, and Pokemon cards is incredibly distracting. It is incredibly distracting. Sorry, I gotta do that. I gotta keep myself consistent. Only a shaman could do something like that. She'd heard legends of the shamans and their powers thanks to the spirits they served, but to actually see it in action? She didn't have time to stay impressed as the bandits rushed him all at once. Nomad moved like water, When the first threw a punch, he walked a step forward and let it slide behind him, leaving a leg behind him to trip him and send him crashing to the ground. But with his step forward, he extended his staff, which struck the bandit directly in front of him. He then pivoted on his front foot, swinging his back foot around to catch a third bandit in the hip. Planting his hand on the ground, he brought his leg all the way around in an arching pattern to strike his heel into the chin of a fourth bandit. It took nearly 4 seconds, and 4 thugs were down, and Nomad looked like he barely tried to fight. Lisha was in awe, but there was more. One pulled a sword and swung at Nomad. He stepped aside and away from the wild strike, then swung his leg behind theirs and swept him off his feet, bringing his staff up to strike the head. As the punk went down, he then planted his foot firmly on the thief's head. "Damn it! The hell are you?" "I'm impatient," Nomad replied. "Where is your leader?" "What do you want him for? He's not even here!" Lisha's eyes widened. He was right. Torin hadn't shown himself. With all this commotion, why hadn't the leader of the bandits come out to deal with Nomad? It didn't make sense, unless he wasn't there to begin with. "Where did he go?" Nomad asked. "How should I know? Torin sometimes gets this itch to go robbing and he runs off. We never know where he goes or when he comes back. It's the only reason you're still breathing, you punk!" Nomad growled and struck his head to knock him out. Lisha just sat there pondering where Torin would go. Where had the Prince of Thieves vanished to? "Go home." Lisha stifled a cry and looked around for the source of the voice. She saw nothing. Nomad had not looked up at her, and all the bandits were either running for their lives or laying on the ground sniveling in pain. She looked around, helpless for someone. Anyone. "Hello?" "Go home. Quickly, girl." This time, Lisha swore she saw something move, something bright and golden moving beyond the trees. There one moment, and then gone. And it looked like a lion. A lion had spoken to her? "Do not wait. Go!" The voice was more urgent this time, and Lisha finally decided to do as it said, more because she was becoming more concerned about why she needed to go more so than she felt compelled to obey. What was at home? Unless... "Torin!" she screamed, sprinting as fast as she could to escape the forest and get back to her house. Her bare feet carried her like the wind. The scratching and poking of brambles, stones, and seeds did nothing to sway her as the reality of the danger set itself on her heart. The Prince of Thieves was not at his hideout because he was back at her family's house. He wanted more. He was going to kill them and take more. It was the only explanation. She had to find him first, stop him if she could. She didn't know how, and she didn't have time to think of a way. As her house came into view, she saw the door swing wide open. The light in one of the windows was visible, and her heart raced fast in her legs. "Mom! Dad!" she screamed as she burst through the open door. There he stood. He wore a cowl over his face, but his yellow eyes were visible as they glared menacingly at her parents. In his hand was a long dagger, and in his other hand was a clenched fist. Dark black and red tattoos were visibly glowing on his arms, and his hooded tunic hung loosely over his body, showing his toned, fit form, but with various scars and wounds like he'd known combat. His glare turned on Lisha as she entered, and she felt her body tremble. "Oh, the daughter returns." "Run, Lisha!" Lisha's father cried. He was on the floor with her mother, holding her in a protective and sheltering posture. "Get out of here!" But Lisha didn't run. She was too petrified to even consider it. The Prince of Thieves rounded on her and marched at her, his eyes glowing as he reached out. "I'm sure you have a few things I can take," he hissed. "Stand your ground, child." There was the voice again. She tried to force it out of her head, but she didn't move either. She drew back her hand to punch Torin, but didn't move. She grit her teeth furiously, ready to strike, but withheld. "Stay away from me! Get out of our house!" Lisha demanded. "I go where I please." He then grabbed her wrist and yanked her towards him. Lisha cried out and tried to punch him, but he struck her across the face. "And I take what I want." Searing pain raced through her face, but fear was more palatable. Fear of pain, fear of worse things. She tried not to think about what he'd take. She closed her eyes tight, fearful as he leaned close, his hot breath on her face. "Help me!" "I am with you." The voice was there, stronger than she'd ever heard before. And even in the darkness of doubt and fear, she saw it at last. The golden lion glowing more brightly than she'd ever seen in anything. Even the sun seemed dimmer in its comparison. "I will not let you come to harm." I can't beat him." "I can," the voice replied. A warmth resonated off of her that pushed the fear far from her mind. She felt the pain in her cheek fade. The fierce hold on her wrist felt somehow weaker. The brightness of the lion felt that much glorious. It stepped towards her out of the dark.
Who are you?
I am the One, the Lord of Spirits, King above all that lives, and this villain who assaults you will feel my wrath for his sins. Will you stand beside me, brave child?
Anything,
Lisha cried with a sense of hesitation or doubt. Tears rolled down her face as she spoke.
I will stand with you. Please, stand with me.
It was like a clap of thunder, a flash of lightning, the burning of fire. Torin leapt back in shock as suddenly Lisha's eyes opened, glowing brightly. There was a holy white light. Her hair seemed to lift as if levitating by a breeze. There was an energy pulsing off of her. She raised her hands and opened her mouth. From her mouth came a roar like a beast, and yet not savage like one. The noble cry of a glorious lion that had long awaited to be heard. Torin fell backward, trembling.
A shaman? No, you can't be. You damn brat. I'll take everything from you, even your spirit.
You will not take anything, Colas. The voice with which Lisha spoke was not hers. There was a sensation to it that indescribed, as if not quite her own voice, something more powerful and beyond it, something speaking through her. I know your name, spirit of greed and want. You have fed off the misery of others long enough. By my authority, I banish you, detestable wretch. Begone! Torin didn't even have time to react as Lisha thrust her palm forward and struck Torin in the chest. The repulse from the shock sent a ripple up her body and sent him rocketing back into the wall like a launched arrow. He struck with enough force to leave a crater in the plaster and sank to the ground in a heap. Lisha's eyes stopped glowing as she suddenly realized what she'd just done, and she fell to her knees as her parents watched.
Lisha, what are you... Mom? Dad? How did I...
Incredible. Lisha spun around at the sound of the voice to see a man at the door. It was the stranger. The Nomad. He stood there taking in the scene, gazing at her, gazing at Torin, and then his gaze softened. I see. So that's why. I was brought here by my master, and I thought it was to find a thief. But it was to find you.
Me?
Lisha cried. He then stepped inside the house and bowed politely to the man and woman. Forgive my intrusion. And forgive me for not being here sooner to stop that wicked man, he indicated Torin. I assure you, you are safe now, thanks to my master.
You're a shaman, yes?
Lisha's father cried. Please,
tell us what just happened. Is my daughter really...
Yes, Nomad answered, gazing at Lisha with a look of calm acceptance and a slight smile. My master has chosen her. She is to be his prophet.
A prophet?
Of course, if that's your intention. He then held out his hand to her. Do you want to know my master as I know him? All right, with that chapter done, I will now show you the image that Jay drew for Torin. And that is what Torin looks like. All right. We'll go ahead and knock that down and move on to the last chapter of the night. Chapter 14. Hey, what's up, Jay? You're coming in at the last chapter of the night. It's probably one of your favorites, too. So glad you're here. Everyone say hi to Jay. He is the artist behind everything. He's the one who drew all the spectacular art you've been seeing. Yep. Jay is here. He is the artist and co-conspirator behind creating Nomad. So let us read the next chapter, and Jay, you will be here to hear it. Let's do it. Chapter 14. The wind was howling now, and Nomad had to keep his cloak under control as he marched across the dune. The land was far away from civilization. It was known as the Badlands, deep in the wilds of the world. But here there was no icy mountains or dense forests or tropical trees, for this was a desert, a wasteland in every sense of the word. Here, jagged rocks like teeth jutted out of the ground to snare those who did not watch their step. Sand blew across the ground and air, making it hard to see at times, and constantly stinging the exposed skin that was unfortunate enough to meet it. It was an unkind and rather dangerous place to be, but it's also where Nomad had to go. Oh, Jay, you were in the chat? I'm sorry. Well, glad you've been enjoying, man. As Nomad stopped a moment to get his bearings, he heard the pants of a young woman behind him. He glanced back to see Lisha tailing close behind, covering her face with her hood to keep the biting sand away.
Master, this land is so gritty. I can't imagine anything lives out here,
Lisha said. Nomad snorted but kept walking with her tailing behind him. You're going to have to learn to get used to settings like this. The One doesn't lead us to places without reason, Nomad answered.
Lisha squeaked and ran faster to keep in pace with him. Oh, I wasn't complaining, sir, she cried. Don't misunderstand. I was only wondering if, well, what is the reason for being here?
You'll find that quite often. The One will reveal the reason for where he sends you or why until the opportune moment. If it is for you to keep your heart and mind open to what he has to say. Lisha beamed and reached into her bag to pull out her notebook, jotting down Nomad's words. Nomad rolled his eyes. Don't let your note-taking make you fall behind.
But, sir, I find it's crucial to document all you say.
I wish you wouldn't.
I know you do not much care for it, but future generations who wish to learn of the One should know the wisdom of the one who follows him.
Lisha contended. Nomad shook his head but said nothing more as they marched. It had been 3 months since Lisha had agreed to follow Nomad as his disciple. Getting used to the young Bronick girl had been difficult at first, especially considering how curious and wide-eyed she could be on everything outside of her homeland. She also had taken up the annoying habit of recording almost everything Nomad said regarding the One, making Nomad feel very uncomfortable at times. It wasn't like she was doing anything wrong necessarily, but the idea that people in the future would read her notes and treat them as some form of gospel truth made him uneasy. Was he truly qualified to preach the next generation? Nomad kept thinking back on his life and wondering about the true meaning of it all. All he'd done is fight and liberate. Ever since the One had met him as a boy, he'd found himself led from one battle to the next. Sometimes against man, sometimes against beast, sometimes against spirits and their shamans. In every case, the One had granted him the power to prevail, but never had the One called him to teach or to shepherd a new flock of believers and worshippers. Not until he'd met Lisha. The implications of this new command left Nomad very uncertain and a little scared. That is why he traveled to the Badlands in search of answers.
I understand they call this place the Badlands, Lisha giggled. I suppose there's nothing good about the Badlands.
She giggled at her own joke, and Nomad shot her a pained smile. Thank goodness your attitude is better than your jokes. Please don't make this journey more painful, Nomad chuckled. Despite his resentment, he couldn't bring himself to dislike Lisha. Her cheerful and bubbly excitement at the world was infectious, and the smile she wore after a lesson was something he'd come to look forward to. The only problems they faced was whenever they would enter a populated town, and her white hair and blue eyes caught the attention of passerby. It didn't matter if the One had chosen her. A Bronick would forever be hated by the Nye. As they crossed over a particularly large dune, Nomad stopped. He looked across the sandy, barren land to see a small rock formation that appeared to grow naturally out of the ground, and it appeared so out of place that one might think it man-made. It took Lisha a minute to see it herself.
What is that? She asked.
Our destination, Nomad answered. There's someone there we have to meet. In fact, I've wanted to meet him for a while.
A friend?
In a manner of speaking, Nomad shrugged. It was hard to call this man friend, for he had no true allegiance to any mortal man or woman. He'd lived a secluded life for years, having minimal exposure to others, and the isolation had driven him partly mad, it seemed. However, the madness also covered an intense will and wisdom that could not be found in anyone else. Like all who followed the One, his name was lost to him. He was simply known as Wasteland. Nomad approached the rock formation and slowly stepped inside. The air was stale, but cooler than what it was outside. As he walked in, Nomad saw a figure seated by a fire with a cast iron pot above it, with something boiling inside. The figure was a man wearing tattered clothing and a hood over his head. Though he was clearly old, his demeanor gave like that of a coiled snake, prepared to strike in an instant if necessary. As Nomad approached, the man turned his head slightly in indication.
"I knew you'd come," he said gruffly.
"You always do."
"Could have knocked," he growled.
When has common courtesy ever been a priority, Mentor? Nomad asked. The word mentor caused a gasp for Lisha.
Mentor? You mean...
Lisha, this is my mentor, and yours as well. One of the first shamans who gave themselves to the One. He was the one who taught me what I know.
And I see you've taken your own disciple, Wasteland noted. He stood up. "Let me take a look at you."
Wasteland held out his hands to Lisha, who approached. His hand fell upon her shoulders, and he stared into her eyes. Lisha looked into his eyes, and then she gasped in disbelief. His eyes were pale gray, sightless.
Are you?
"I am blind to the foolishness of this world, but the One allows me to see things your eyes couldn't comprehend,"
Wasteland answered dismissively, waving aside his blindness. They both stood silent a moment before Wasteland gave a shivering sigh.
"Yes, I see him in you. The One has indeed chosen you."
"I wouldn't have taken her on otherwise," Nomad pointed out.
"No, I suppose you wouldn't. What is your name, child?"
Lisha.
"Cling to that name while you can, for in time you will sacrifice it," Wasteland muttered.
Yes, Master Nomad has told me, and I am greatly looking forward to it.
Lisha beamed. Wasteland stared a moment and then shook his head.
"You're a strange one," he grumbled. "Very eager, aren't you?"
Following Master has been one of the greatest decisions I ever made. He's truly opened my eyes to the world.
"Has he now?" Wasteland muttered. "My dear, would you do this old man a favor?"
Yes?
"There is a well not far from here to the south. Could you run there and bring back a few bags of water?"
He held out 3 animal skin sacks.
"We'll have dinner together tonight. It's the least I can do."
Lisha took the sacks and eagerly ran out of the little underground hut to do as asked, leaving Nomad alone with his mentor.
"You've got a real problem on your hands, boy."
"She's not all bad. She's eager, but she's not foolish," Nomad answered.
"That's not what I meant," Wasteland answered. "The girl is devoted to you."
"As was I to you, if you'll recall."
"Yes, but I kept you at an arm's reach, so one day you'd learn to let go of me and move on. But that girl, she's a puppy playfully licking at your ankles. She has tasted the power of the One, and she believes you will show her more. She cannot truly receive the One and become his shaman until she learns to let go of you and embrace him."
"Then what would you suggest, Mentor? Treat her coldly?"
"No. It would send the wrong message entirely. Frankly, you'll need to simply explain all this to her before she gets the wrong stars in her eyes."
"I'll do what I can, but there's more, Mentor."
"You don't need to say it," he muttered.
Nomad sat down by the walls as Wasteland sat beside his cast iron pot, stirring the stew inside coldly. "You know what I'm concerned about, don't you?"
"I do,"
he answered. "Is it true, Mentor? Are my fears justified?" Wasteland gave no reply to that, leaving Nomad frustrated as his hands shook. "I knew this time would come, but I thought I would be more ready for it."
"You are ready, boy. You just don't realize it," Wasteland answered.
I've faced dozens of corrupted shamans and spirits, men and women bent towards evil. And I've slayed beasts bent on bloodlust, but this... Mentor, I feel such dread at this next challenge. And to think that Lisha will be there to face it too? Wasteland's head perked up and he glanced towards Nomad. That's why you're here, isn't it? You're afraid of having her along for this one. You don't believe she's ready, and you want me to babysit her. Not to babysit her, Mentor, to train her. I'm no mentor, I'm no teacher, I'm not you. Like you said, she needs proper guidance. No, Wasteland snapped. The One chose you for this task, and it is you who will fulfill it. She will be there to help you confront your next trial, and she will grow from it or fail. Nomad bowed his head. You're right, Mentor. Forgive me. Before Wasteland could speak, the young Lisha hurried in, carrying 3 bags of water.
I'm back. Everything okay?
Yes, Nomad replied. My mentor and I were just catching up.
Oh, good. May I listen?
She asked, taking out her notebook. Oh, yes. Mentor, forgive my disciple. She has made a bad habit of logging all that I say and do. It's most annoying. What diligence, Wasteland smirked. Were you only so devoted when I taught you? Come now, Mentor, I was devoted, Nomad argued. You were slow and as thick as headed as a stone, Wasteland scoffed. You were so laser-focused on achieving your goals, you never stopped to consider if you were fully prepared to meet them. I recall I asked you to go fishing in the local river, and you were so focused on the catch you forgot to bait the rod. Mentor, Nomad blushed. Seriously? Lisha laughed. Oh, that's not even the half of it. When you came back to get the bait, I chastised you for your forgetfulness, and you were so caught up arguing with me, you started walking away with the bait still not with you. I had to throw it at you. Master? Lisha was beside herself, giggling while Nomad was blushing. I was a child. You're still a child to me, boy, Wasteland replied. His voice softened, though. You were a foolish student, but... He stopped speaking, and slowly his eyes turned up to gaze at Nomad. Though they were blind, Nomad could almost feel them piercing his soul. Wasteland didn't need to speak. He felt the words in his very heart.
You must tell me more about my master when he was younger.
Maybe another day, Wasteland sighed, turning his attention to the cast-iron pot.
Well, then perhaps I'll hear them from Master later. He still has so many more adventures to go ahead with me, and I'm sure I'll make just as many errors as he did.
Nomad gave a smile to her, but his eyes turned to Wasteland, who had turned away from them both, unspeaking, and a cold silence fell over everyone. Lisha didn't understand it.
I mean, I'll try not to make those errors, of course,
Lisha offered, trying to bring levity to the conversation. I'm sure you will, Nomad smiled. I have faith you will learn much more from me, and very soon, I'm sure. All right, and that is chapter 14. I will now show you the image that Jay drew of Wasteland, the first shaman of the One. I think I still have it saved, or don't I? No, I do not think I do. That is a real pity. Let me check real quick. I do not have it saved, but I can try to get it real quick. Let me see now. There we go. It's a little smaller than Jay's normal art, but there it is. That is him. Yeah, I liked Wasteland too, Jay. Jay was really awesome. Wasteland was really awesome. Here's his image. Finally got it up there. What's really funny about a lot of the art that was drawn, most of the time when Jay drew an image, he read the chapter first and then created the image to go with the chapter. But with Wasteland, I didn't create a chapter. He just drew Wasteland and said, hey, here's a picture for Nomad. You decide what to do with them. And I said, you know what? I'm going to make him Nomad's mentor. That was kind of how this one came to be. All right. Well, we've actually got more time than I thought, so we can go ahead on to the next chapter if y'all would like. Let me see. Yep, here we go. All right. Chapter 15, if you'd like. Here we go. Chapter 15, written August 17th, 2022. Lisha's heart was beating faster than it had ever done before. She was panting but remaining quiet as a ghost, her eyes trained on the carriage ahead of her and the men walking around it. But more importantly, the figure dragged behind it. Her teeth dug into her bottom lip as she bit back the urge to scream, to shout something, but she could do nothing. Though she wanted so badly to leap out of the forest and charge into the fray, she could not. Her master would be upset with her if she did. It had been a normal day. The sun was shining and Nomad had been leading Lisha along the road near the small regional city known as Mayo. Nomad had been quiet most of the day, more so than usual. To be honest, he seemed more quiet than normal since they'd left the desert where Nomad's old mentor lived. Lisha knew better than to bother her master with needless questions, but she was so concerned for him. But before the sun had finished climbing to its highest point, a large carriage came rolling up to the two of them, escorted on all sides by armored men carrying spears. Nomad had stopped, encouraging Lisha to do the same. From out of the carriage stepped a large man with thick arms and legs and a round face, but with a generous beard on his face. His eyes were somehow muddy brown and his hair was black. He had on a large overcoat with ribbons and medals hanging from it. He had a small fan in his fingers, which he waved weakly under his face to keep the heat off. He glared at Nomad unceremoniously and sneered.
Are you the shaman called Nomad? He asked.
I am.
I am Duke Slorn of Mayo, ruling lord of the province and city. I am placing you under arrest for treason against the country of Nye. You will surrender immediately and come with us.
Lisha gasped with horror and ran between Slorn and her master.
My master has done nothing. What proof do you have of these crimes?
Who are you? His child? Stand aside, girl, or be arrested with him, Slorn snapped.
Lisha made a movement, but Nomad placed a hand on her shoulder. Calm yourself, Lisha. Calm yourself, Nomad instructed.
But master, you're no criminal. They can't do this to you.
It's fine, Lisha, he replied. It's going to be fine. Don't interfere, Nomad urged. He then stepped around her and towards the guards. I'll go with you, but let the girl go unharmed. The guards looked to Slorn, who simply shrugged and got back in his carriage.
As you wish. Bind his hands and pull him along.
Lisha had followed the carriage closely, but out of sight since Nomad had been taken. She didn't know what was intended for him, or why he said that he was going to be okay, but she knew it wasn't. One look at Duke Slorn told her he wasn't a man to be trusted. Why would Nomad so willingly go along with this? Why would he submit so willingly? She couldn't understand it. As they drew close to the city, though, she began to understand piece by piece. The subtle hum of speech grew into a loud roar of rage. There was a crowd in the city of Mayo. People were out in force, chanting and screaming at the carriage as it passed, or rather, at Nomad, who was walking behind it. Lisha was shocked at the sight. Men and women shaking fists, screaming and spitting at Nomad as he walked by. She quickly threw a cloak over her head to hide her white hair and snuck into the crowd to follow her master. The crowd moved like a wave of shouting and angry flesh, screaming words like traitor, murderer, heathen, and other obscenities. Nomad didn't look in their direction, but merely continued his march behind the carriage into the city. Lisha stayed as close as she could, watching as he went. In the town square, there stood a small wooden platform with a flat rock in the center. The rock was stained red with blood. It was an executioner's block. Lisha felt her blood run cold as the carriage finally ceased its progress and the guards moved to take Nomad to that stand. Nomad walked up onto the wooden stand like it were a mere stroll across a lawn. He showed no fear or hesitation, but there was only a serious expression on his face that Lisha could not read. Duke Slorn left his carriage and marched around the town square, waving to the crowds around him. He smiled pleasantly at them as he made his way to the other side of the square, where a throne waited for him. The spectator's seat. He sat his large rump in the chair and adjusted himself casually before letting out a sigh and waving his hand. As he did, Lisha noticed that for the briefest of moment, his eyes glowed a dim orange. Perhaps it was a trick of the mid-afternoon sun? No, it couldn't be. Could it? But with a wave of his hand, the crowd fell silent once more, and he cleared his throat to speak.
Good people of Mayo, before you stands the man known only as Nomad, Shaman of the One.
The crowd burst into a fury of hisses and jeers, some throwing tomatoes and fruits at Nomad, who didn't even flinch but stared ahead at Slorn with distaste. Slorn waved his hand again for silence, which he received.
Nomad, would you speak your real name to the people?
I have no name.
So be it,
Slorn groaned, waving aside the informality.
In any case, you are found guilty of 3 counts of murder, 2 counts of treachery to the land of Nye, conspiracy, provoking a conflict with the Brannock, and the economical sabotage of Nye itself. Do you accept these charges?
Why would I accept them? Nomad replied. I am innocent.
Liar!
You traitor! Kill him already! The people were in an uproar, demanding Nomad's head. Lisha was fuming, but dared not expose herself. Slorn showed no sign of concern and shrugged.
Then let us examine the evidence, shall we?
He waved his hand, and a young man in black robes approached Slorn and then handed him a scroll. Slorn unrolled the scroll and examined the top, reading off of it carefully.
You were seen almost a year ago in the town of Cree, when a shaman named Belzar was residing there. In broad daylight, you openly challenged Belzar and fought him, did you not? Slorn asked.
I did.
His remains were found in the forest outside of Cree. It seems you did not do well at disposing of your victim.
The crowd hissed and jeered at him. I'm unaware that he died, Nomad answered. He was alive when last I left him.
How convenient.
Slorn snapped his fingers, and the black-robed figure walked towards the platform, holding a box. He opened it to reveal a severed, bald head. Nomad stared with disgust, but also with recognition. It was the head of Belzar. Indeed, the shaman was dead.
Moving on from this charge, your next sighting was on the island of Charton, a booming and prosperous city until you were seen there. According to eyewitness reports, you destroyed over half the city, leaving it as nothing but rubble using your shaman powers.
Who claimed this? Nomad asked. When I arrived in Charton, a shaman named Drayton had caused the devastation by starting a revolution. Slorn laughed.
Yes, Drayton did start a revolution, and in winning he became the new governor of Charton. When you stripped him of his shaman powers, he fled, leaving the island leaderless and defenseless. It remains a ruined wreck of a city today.
The crowd roared with rage as Nomad inhaled slowly, starting to understand the uselessness of defending himself. Even Lisha could see it. This was a show trial, a formality.
Then, he continued, on your way to Boltcha, the town beyond the Nye territory in the Brannock lands, did you offer aid to Brannock refugees and harm an innocent Nye citizen who had been assaulted?
I did aid refugees, that's true, but it was they who were assaulted by the Nye thief.
Not true!
From behind Slorn throne walked a man that Nomad recognized in an instant. The man who had attacked the woman and child beyond Boltcha.
Those wicked Brannock stole from me and my family, and that's the shaman who attacked me and let them go. He's a traitor, I tell you, a traitor!
The crowd was even more furious now. Lisha could see the satisfied smile on the man's face. He was a liar, and he was slandering Master Nomad. She tried to sneak closer, to get towards the platform if she could, but the crowd was too thick to squeeze through.
And, Slorn continued, after arriving in Boltcha, you assaulted a Brannock warrior there, breaking the non-aggression treaty between the Nye and the Brannock. You could have pulled our entire country back into war when we've been struggling to maintain peace. Nomad, have you no shame at all?
Nomad didn't bother speaking up in his defense. There was no point now. It didn't matter what he said. No defense would save him. Slorn knew this too, so he carried on.
And then there was the shameless acts you performed in Shocha, the oasis city. You entered the city brothel, shamelessly harassed one of the best courtesans, and then deserted the brothel before leaving, causing the economical status of the cities to crash.
Should I bother explaining the truth to you, or will you speak over me again? Nomad asked.
Why should I speak over you, when the girl herself can speak? Slorn laughed.
From his left side walked a woman who Nomad sneered at in disgust. Long black hair, a luscious body, and a sensual green stare. She swung her hips with each movement like a snake's body slithers, and she beamed seductively at Nomad. She flicked black hair out of her face to look Nomad directly in the face.
I was the woman he assaulted. He left me beaten, dejected, and humiliated. I'd never felt so ashamed in my life. He's a monster. Nothing but a monster, Higomi cried.
Higomi, I see Salix has returned to you, Nomad grumbled, and it seems your heart was truly as wretched as your physical form. The crowd was beside themselves now, chanting and stamping their feet. Rapist, they called him. Murderer, traitor, warmonger, all called for the same thing, and Slorn was pleased to provide it.
With all this overwhelming evidence and testimony, and with no compelling evidence to the contrary, I'm forced to find Nomad Shaman of the One guilty on all counts. And his sentence is to be execution. Does the criminal have any final words to say before we pass his sentence?
Nomad paused a moment, gazing up at the heavens. As Lisha battled her way through the crowd to get closer, as she finally began to get to the front of the mob, Nomad's eyes turned and saw her. Seeing her among the people, he smiled at her somberly, and then shook his head for her to stop. Lisha froze, tears filling her eyes.
Master?
She whispered. Nomad just shook his head again, and then turned back to look at Slorn. I see you for what you truly are, Slorn, and I know who you serve. You have deceived these people, but my eyes are not fooled. As he spoke, Nomad's eyes glowed bright, his tattoos shining brightly, and an energy rolled off of him. When he spoke, it was as if a second voice was erupting from his throat, not his own. You pass your false judgment upon me, but know that true judgment awaits you, deceiver. Your city will be struck to the ground, and as your subjects plea and cry out for deliverance, you will suffer, and know that their misery is of your own doing. When your last breath escapes your lips, you will know the Lord of Spirits. Slorn looked taken aback a moment, a cold sweat running down his face. But as the silent crowd looked to him for a response, he composed himself quickly and coughed.
Empty threats from a criminal. Off with his head, at once!
The guards approached and pulled Nomad down to the block, where they forced him to kneel. Nomad's body ceased to glow, and he let his head rest on the block. He turned his eyes to Lisha, who was now sobbing miserably as tears fell down her face, her lips quivering. Master, she screamed, her voice drowned out by the cheering crowd. Go, Lisha. Go and fulfill the will of our Lord. I have fought the good fight, and I have no regrets. This is my final trial. The nearest guard lifted a giant sword over his head to swing down on Nomad's neck. Go, he whispered. and my blessings be with you. Lisha screamed and ran from the crowd towards the city gates as fast as she could, not wanting to look, not wanting to see. But she didn't need to see it. The explosion of cheers from the crowd announced the death of her master and the loss of Nomad, the shaman of the One. As Lisha fled the city and the body of Nomad slumped to the wooden platform, none in the crowd could hear it. Only a handful who had met Nomad in life could sense it. The sudden ripple in the air, the sudden surge of anguish. Far away, a lion roared in lamentation. An old man in a hut below ground shed a tear for his lost pupil. A young girl wept bitterly beside a river. And the world felt the death of one who gave everything, even his own name, to try to make a better place. And now, of course, Jay, if you're still there, you'll want me to show it. Jay did not draw an image for this chapter. He drew a comic. No, I'm not kidding. He drew a comic. This you've got to see. Hold on, let me get this for you. Here it is. Got to shrink it a little bit. But you can see the top panel with Slorn, Nomad before he's about to be executed, and Lisha's reaction. All in 3 glorious panels. Let's shrink it down a bit so it can fit in the screen. There you go. I'll leave it up there for a second. Yeah, Jay outdid himself with this. He really did. Like, I absolutely love this. It just kicked so much butt. Like, this was such a good image. Like, it would have been real easy to just draw a simple image of Slorn or of Nomad on the execution block, but he frickin' drew a whole comic page. It was so good. So, bravo, dude. Bravo. All right. Well, that takes care of that. And I think we got time for one more, because it's not 10:30 yet. I think we got time for one more. Let's do one more, and then we'll wrap it up. How about that? I'm going to put an image up. One second. Got to find it real quick. I have so many images just buried away. There it is. Got it. Got it. And uploading. There it is. A little smaller. And we'll put that right there. All right, here we go. What is Slorn's spirit? You'll find out in just a minute. All right, here we go. Two years had passed in the kingdom of Mayo since the execution of the shaman known as Nomad. The people had believed firmly in the will of their king, for he too was a shaman, as was his consort. It had seemed so fortuitous when he had arrived to take the throne. He proclaimed to be a duke of the province, and would work to bring Mayo into a golden age so long as the people worked diligently for him. The taxation was a tad steep, but the benefits of Duke Slorn's reign seemed far too great to be concerned about such things. The weather was always kind to their crops, the cattle and livestock produced in abundance, and it seemed even bouts of plague that infected the country of Nye never appeared in Mayo. After the death of Nomad, many of the thrilled and excited citizens had begged Duke Slorn to become their king rather than their reigning noble. He happily accepted the role and now sat in his palace of splendor overlooking Mayo. With Nomad dead, Slorn thought, there's nothing left to fear. I can carry on my reign unabated and unchallenged by that meddler. Hagomi, the shaman of Salax, had sought out Slorn to warn him of Nomad's crusade against the other shamans. With her guidance and persuasion, he'd had his network of spies, attendants, and confidants discover the movements of Nomad and uncover every past action he'd taken. All of his interactions with other shamans, all of his victories, even reports he received frightened him even more than the last, for it seemed no matter what shaman that Nomad faced, Nomad was always the victor in the conflict. But there was one story that stuck out to him. When the rogue from Boltcha had been found and questioned about the events in Brannock lands, the thief had told Slorn how, though prejudiced against them himself, Nomad had saved the Brannock woman and child from theft. It seemed that Nomad would not bring himself to harm citizens. He always avoided casualties upon innocents. That could be useful if he could turn the innocents against Nomad. The stage trial was all he needed. It all had worked beautifully. Almost too well, Slorn had thought at the time. He'd expected a struggle, or for the little Brannock slave of his to try and fight him. He'd thought that perhaps Nomad would attack his guards, or at the very least plead for his life. Instead, he accepted every insult, every accusation, and every jeer with grace and honor, and then offered a threat of vengeance before being beheaded. It was all so easy. Slorn liked easy things. He liked to kick his feet up and let success fall into his lap. But then he'd felt it was wrong somehow. Why would Nomad surrender unless he knew something? For months he'd waited for anything to happen. An attack, a disaster, for some kind of event or assassination. But none ever came.
He was weak, Hagomi shrugged. Think nothing more of the Nomad. He's dead and gone and will trouble us no further.
Now, 2 years later, Slorn had almost forgotten Nomad and his actions and death. One evening, while enjoying a lavish feast at his grand hall with all his attendants, friends, and nobility, with Hagomi standing by his side and smiling wickedly, Slorn was basking in his power and status, and then the doors to his halls opened with invitation. The laughter died and the music stopped. A figure walked into the hall, staff in hand and hood over her head, though her figure was clearly female. As she approached, she paused and pulled back her hood. Her hair, as white as snow, revealed itself, and eyes as blue as the sky glared daggers into Slorn and Hagomi.
"What is the meaning of this intrusion?" Slorn demanded. "How did you get into my grand hall? Gods!"
"Forgive me, your majesty,"
the girl answered, her accent clearly that of the Brannock, if her eyes and hair were not enough indication.
"I'm afraid I had to see you immediately, and your guards were unaccommodating. They're asleep now. I ask you not to punish them. I was the one who encouraged their nap." "Quite the gall you have," Hagomi hissed at the woman.
Slorn shared her loathing.
"And what business do you have with the king of Mayo, wench?"
The Brannock woman smiled.
"I bring you a eep."
Before she could finish her statement, her foot caught on the hem of her robe, and she was yanked face first to the floor, her staff clattering next to her as she groaned in pain and embarrassment. The patrons couldn't stop laughing, filling the hall with mocking jeers and laughs. Surely she was a jester, some silly clown to laugh at. Only Slorn did not laugh. He was still trying to remember why this girl looked so familiar. The girl winced, cursing silently to herself from her circumstances as she brushed herself off, her face a little red with embarrassment.
"Perhaps it is good to learn how to walk before one learns to speak," Slorn challenged, drawing more laughs from the hall. State your business and be gone, Brannock whore.
If the insult affected the woman, she didn't show it. She inhaled slowly, as if focusing on a thought. And then her eyes opened, and they glowed with a white light that made Hagome and Slorn both go pale. That white ethereal light glowing off of her. It was the same one. The same power.
You, Slorn hissed.
Slorn of Mayo, shaman of the spirit Sidon, you are guilty of executing a prophet of the One, Lord of Spirits. And as promised 2 years ago, I have come to deliver judgment upon you and all of Mayo. The voice was powerful and booming, a complete contrast to the young woman before them now. Every man and woman in the chamber was on their feet in disbelief.
Tough talk, but you won't hurt these people here, or me, Slorn cried out.
He turned to Hagome, who stood beside him.
You face 2 shamans here. You are only one. You can't possibly challenge us both.
The room cleared with an unnatural speed as every bystander ran to the walls to avoid the coming battle. But no battle came. The woman with the glowing eyes only smiled and held out her hand.
Oh, I will not lay a finger on you, King Slorn, nor will I touch your consort, she replied. Your judgment will be unlike anything I have done before. All of Mayo will know this wrath.
Mayo? You wouldn't. They're innocent people.
People who gave themselves willingly into the arms of the wicked. People who willingly executed an innocent man. They will not be spared my wrath. But please, your majesty, if you are a king of any merit, do what you can for them. Save your subjects. But know that the more you flail at me, the more you desperately claw at the power you've built for yourself. The more these people will see you for what you are. And when the moment of clarity comes, they will weep at the death of my prophet and demand the bloated meat upon your shoulders that you call a head.
Who do you think you are? Slorn roared. Seize that woman at once!
The guards inside the hall, who had been staring dumbstruck, seemed to come to life at the moment and rushed to grab her. The woman raised her hands, and suddenly the stone around her burst upward in jagged spines, reaching out dangerously as if to impale any who took a step near her. This was nothing like what Nomad had ever done, and there was an anger to her eyes that belonged to both her and to the one who spoke through her. As her eyes stopped glowing, her voice returned to its normal, delicate tone as she spoke.
My name is Lisha, she replied. Nomad was my master, and the One is my teacher. From this day forward, Mayo will suffer.
Without a word and without consequence, Lisha walked out of the grand chamber to the suffocation of the audience. As Slorn went to bed that night, he tried to ignore the warning he'd been given, not to focus on it. All empty threats. He and Hagome were both shamans of powerful spirits, and Nomad had been weak as a kitten when he was executed. So this little Brannock is the new chosen. Whatever. She wasn't a full shaman yet. She was still inexperienced. What could she do to him? But with the coming of the day, Lisha's threat would be made manifest, and the wrath of the One descended upon Mayo. All right. And I think we'll go ahead and end it there. Unfortunately, guys, let me check. There's only, honestly, 2 more chapters left of Nomad. There is only 2 more chapters left of Nomad. That's sad, guys. That is really sad, but that is the truth. Gosh, I've really enjoyed this story. But we're going to go ahead and wrap it up there because I don't think we have enough time to read 17 and 18. I hope you guys have enjoyed this story so far. It's been a lot of fun. Let me know what you've enjoyed the most about it. Let me know in the comments what you think about Nomad and his story. This has been really, really great. Thank you guys very much. What? I'm reading some of the chat comments. He is Shaman of Sloth. Yes, Slorn is the Shaman of Sloth. Because my whole idea with Slorn was that he doesn't have to work to get anything. He gets other people to do his dirty work for him. Like, he didn't execute Nomad himself. He got the city to do it for him. He likes easy things. He wants success to come to him. So he doesn't go out of his way to do anything. So Slorn is the shaman of sloth. If you couldn't tell, I've hit all the deadly sins. Anyway, tune in next time when we finish up Nomad and we read a few short stories. Okay? All right. Well, thank you guys so much. And as always, I will see you in my next video. Take care.